This is CounterPoint, and I'm your host, Tanya Granic Allen. We're back with our current events panel with lots of commentary on the latest headlines. Today, we're going to discuss the various provincial attempts to ban cell phones, social media, and energy drinks for children. And there's even a federal attempt now to bar social media for children under 16. We're going to dive into federal legislation C-9, the Combating Hate Act, which recently passed the Senate. And then we're also going to discuss the new Trump tariffs. We're going to talk about the Kuzma renewal and discussions and negotiations and what it means for you and for Canadians. And we'll dive into the World Cup, not for a header, but we're going to discuss the excitement, the drama, and of course, the debt. Will there be a large debt for Vancouver and Toronto once these games are through? So lots to get through. And joining me now is Michelle Simard, lawyer, privacy and cybersecurity specialist, and Mike Patton, political commentator. Mike, Michelle, always a pleasure to have you on. We have a lot to get through today, so we're going to really start. Let's talk about C-9. So this has been a long-standing, controversial bill working its way through Parliament. Mike, where does it rest now?
Well, where it rests, there's been some minor amendments in the Senate, but the core issue here is nobody's in favor of online hate speech. The issue really centers around religious exemption. Traditionally, if you had profound religious beliefs, you could express those religious beliefs honestly and fairly and be exempt from any sort of human rights or hate references. So, for example, as a Catholic, if I said I did not believe in abortion, that couldn't be considered hate speech because I was expressing a legitimate religious view. That exemption has been removed from this legislation, making it much more comprehensive and limiting of free speech than it ever was before.
And we've heard a lot of public outcry from religious public figures, cardinals, clerics, pastors who have grave concerns over this bill and its limitation of free speech. Michelle, why did they not? Why did the House of Commons committee? Why didn't they protect religious freedom in this particular case? Is the Bible now going to be considered hate speech? Because there's a lot of things in the Bible that some people could say, hey, you know what? This is way out of sync with where we are in society now.
Yeah, well, for the specific reasons, I don't know why they did that, but I think in some ways is because it not necessarily is because of the actual Bible, but I think it could be for other types of religious texts. Um, but obviously, the Bible is included. I think it is a protection. I think that there's a lot of concern from obviously like civil liberties groups and a lot of religious groups. However, I would say that when you do have any form of legislation and it does go before a court, they always look at the rationale, the policy foundation of why that bill and that particular legislation was enacted. So the goal is about hate. So clearly, if even if there is something that's brought up, for instance, as we've seen, where certain parts of the Bible may say it's not appropriate for a man and a man to be with each other. I don't think that would be hugely problematic if it was put in a certain, if it was brought out, but it would be problematic if it was advertised in a hateful and demeaning way and used in paraphernalia. So I think context is really important. So I understand the concern, but I think context and how it's applied is what's going to set a precedent and see how this legislation happens.
But Mike, and maybe Michelle, I don't know who wants to jump in here, but we have laws already on the books, do we not, against inciting violence and hate and things like that? Why was it necessary to bring in yet another law on this?
Well, and this was the argument against this legislation that there's already restrictions about inciting violence or any sort of real hate, and just mentioning your religious views was just considered to be exempt. So this is really not going to help anybody to protect against hate speech. It's only going to restrict what religious people are able to express.
Wow.
I
Are we going to
disagree. I disagree with that, though.
jump in?
I on the counterpoint is this: many and all the major Jewish organizations were supporting this legislation, and they felt it was necessary for them given the anti-Semitism that has been happening throughout the world. So for them, it was very pointed, and the federal government didn't need to do it, but it was pushed by certain lobby groups. So I think at the end of the day, I think we're trying to look at a compromise here, that some groups did need it because they felt it was the only way that they could protect themselves.
Or is it the problem that there was just no enforcement of the current laws that already existed? Because if that speech by
That
some of
too.
these anti-Israel groups was inciting violence, which I've heard some of the speech and a lot of it did, then that should have been prosecuted. And that's the solution. Anyhow, we're going to pick this up in just a moment. Welcome back to CounterPoint. We're going to switch gears now from C-9 and discuss Ottawa's latest announcement that it plans to seek legislation to ban, that's right, B-A-N, ban, children under the age of 16 from using social media. This also falls on the heels of what Quebec is trying to do, which is to ban the sale of energy drinks for the same cohort. Ontario is trying to introduce policies through their education system
Cell
to
phone.
bar cell phones in the classroom, social media for the kids. There's a lot of banning going on. I'm not a big fan of banning
Yes,
because
there
to
is.
me that's like anti-freedom.
Same here.
However, the end goal here I support. Okay, Michelle, why don't you start us off? Why is there such a upheaval? And we've seen this in other jurisdictions of the world, like Australia, et cetera. Why is social media such a target of governments right now?
I think because it's the Wild West still. And at the end of the day, it's such free range that there is no type of regulations or guidances, because it has moved so fast as a technology, and parents who do have children may have not kept up with that technology, and as a result the children who've brought up with this have now know how to use it better, and as a result they have gone to everywhere, including the dark web. And as we've heard through, even without Canada, there has been some consequences. People have committed suicide because of bullying, or they've had sexual predators. And I think realistic, what they're realizing now, when you have something that comes too fast and there's no precautions or guidances on how to deal with it, then they need to do that. The only problem is, I'm with you. I don't like bans. I don't want government interference. I think it should be the last resort, not the first attempt. And at the end of the day, I think that there are other measures that could be implemented before we do outright bans. And I do believe, though, when it comes to schools, like for instance in Ontario, that it shouldn't have to be the actual government. It could be the actual individual school within consultation with the stakeholders, and that being the students and the parents. This way, it's a little bit more of a free and democratic way of creating a safe environment and guidelines. But the government could do is provide guidelines to all the schools and school boards for them to individually discuss within them and have like a vote, as opposed to an all-out ban.
Okay, Mike, I want you to chime in because I have a couple things to say on this. What do you think? Is this too heavy-handed? Even in Quebec, no energy
Yes.
drinks for kids under 16. I don't even know why people are buying energy drinks. I mean, do children
Well,
really need more
Agreed.
energy?
and
No.
listen, I enjoy a good energy drink, but let me tell you, they are so much
No.
more expensive than just regular pop. A 6-year-old is not going into 7-Eleven by themselves and buying a Monster energy drink. They're just not. This is something that's either provided by the parents, or it is, I don't know where they're getting a hold of it. And shouldn't this be up to the parents, what you feed your children? How much social media your children have access to? This should be really very much up to the parents, and managing this should be the parents' job, not government's. The exception to this, I think, is having cell phones in classrooms, in school during class hours. I think that's a legitimate distraction, and I think it's perfectly fair to say, look, what you do on your phone in your own time is one thing, but in the classroom, you should not be on your phone scrolling or texting your friends. So I think there's a subtle difference here, but most of it should be managed by the parents.
100%. You know what? I
Yeah.
don't need a ban. I need a parents. You know what? If your kids are, I don't know, on social media, which I don't know why children are under 18 are on social media, because frankly, I don't think these are good habits. But
Yeah.
and I don't know what's on there. If I don't know, I'm not going to hand my child like a loaded gun or an unloaded gun. I don't know if there's a bullet or not. You're not going to do that. Why would you give them a weapon in their hand, which you don't know where it can lead? Why don't we just not give the children phones? Why don't parents just make that decision? Maybe some parents want to give their children phones. Who am I to say no?
And that's
That's their
it. And that
family.
should be their business, right?
That's their business. I have a very strict
Yeah.
policy. As for schools, like It's so disrespectful to be looking at your phone while you're being having a class conversation with the teacher who's teaching. It's very disrespectful. We need to teach respect. Do I think they should be barred from schools? No. I'll tell you why. Because parents communicate with their children. There's a lot of after-school activities, and it's become now commonplace, unless there's going to be some public phone available, to not use the office phone. It's expected that you have your own phone. It's a very interesting environment. So unless the school boards or the schools are going to come up with an alternative way for children to communicate with their parents for pickup and things, I don't know how one bans it. But I agree. I think this is very heavy-handed. I think we need to equip parents to do their job properly and not say, oh, you know what, I don't want a parent. I don't want a parent. I need Prime Minister Mark Carney to step in, or Premier Doug Ford's going to parent for me. Ha ha ha. Or I don't know, Francois Legault or whomever's in Quebec right now who's promoting this legislation. We don't need the government. We need parents to step up. I think so. Am I right? Maybe.
Yes, but with guidances.
Welcome back to CounterPoint. We have our current events panel joined by Michelle Simard and Mike Patton. Thank you again both for being here. Let's change topics now. We're going to look south of the border again.
Okay.
It seems to be a perennial topic. We're going to talk about some newly announced Trump tariffs, the Kuzma negotiations that are happening or not happening, because it seems like there's more bilateral action happening between the U.S. and Mexico, and what this means for Canada. So maybe, Mike, you start us off. What's going on with Kuzma?
Well, there's so much going on with Kuzma. One of the interesting things that has really just happened is the U.S. Supreme Court has said that the president's not allowed to really introduce economic-based tariffs. So Donald Trump, instead of saying, well, I'm just not going to do that anymore, he's shifted gears and said he's going to implement tariffs on countries that ignore forced labor practices. And Canada is one of those countries, because while we don't have forced labor here in Canada, we do import products from countries that do have forced labor. And in spite of the fact that we do have laws prohibiting this, it's not something that's not really enforced. So this is going to be yet another tariff forced on us by the Americans, and it has to do with forced labor.
Oh yeah, and so this is a masterclass in how to maneuver. Good on Trump. You've played your cards well. Yeah, he's now shaming the world as a moral superior, including Canada, for using forced labor. Like, I think a lot of our EVs that people drive around with their electric vehicles, I mean, all that cobalt extraction, et cetera, that comes from forced labor, child labor too. So very interesting. So more than 60 countries have been hit with these tariffs. Is Trump wrong, Michelle? Was he wrong to take this approach?
Yes, of course he is, because at the end of the day, this is just a loophole for him to achieve the aims that he wanted to have. Because at the end of the day, he's trying to do the moral high ground, but the United States is just as guilty as other countries of doing it. The only difference is they're not being hit, but other countries are. So he just found what I call it, a legal loophole to still enforce his tariffs, to achieve his aims. And to be honest, I know you said the moral high ground, but that was just kind of like a bonus. That it gets to be on a moral high ground note. But realistically, the US is just as guilty as the rest of us. So realistically, I think Canada is in a position that, so there have been tests done through the Canadian Borders and Services that they have seen that we have on occasion, but we have rarely had many goods that have come in. We are guilty of it, no doubt about that. And can we do better? Absolutely. But like you said, with many other things in all our shows, right? Enforcement's really hard. It's hard to detect. But us on a grand scale is very, very small on how we breach that. So we'll see how it goes. And I think the mechanism he's just doing it's just something else. He's just trying to wrench into the Kuzma talks, which realistically is problematic. And then, of course, the regular go-to, oh, you're going to be a 51st state. Oh, we're not, Canada's this and that. And it's just like, it's the same go-to. So for me, I just sit there and be like, I don't find it sophisticated. And frankly, you gave him credit. I don't think he should get that credit. I don't even think that was his loophole he found. I'm sure he hired a group of lawyers.
I don't know who on his
how can I
team
get
found it? I don't know who on his team found it. I just like the maneuvering. I'm like, hey, point for you. You found a loophole. Mike, let's talk about Kuzma. So Canada has said it wants Kuzma renewed. I think Canada is very concerned because it seems that the U.S. is negotiating bilaterally with Mexico. to get their deal done. And congrats to President Claudia Sheinbaum for getting it done or working on it. What about Canada? Are we just going to be relegated to the nether regions of North America? Like, where is the cohesion that we need?
Well, this should be a real concern for all Canadians because so much of our business is tied up with trade to the United States. And in spite of the fact that the Liberals have been saying they're going to expand international trade, they're hardly even making a dent in it. And our economic livelihood is based on trade to the United States. So we need a reasonable and fair trade deal with the Americans. And who is really prepared within the Canadian government to stand up and push back against the Americans? I would argue that the Mexicans took the right tone and said, here's, we're digging our heels in and we're going to go negotiate with you directly. The Canadian government, I don't think, has really a very robust strategy on how they're going to get things like the Auto Pact to be enforced and to continue on. Because in Ontario, the automobile manufacturing is an enormous part of the economy.
Absolutely. And everybody wants to win. Mexico wants to go back to their citizens and say, hey, look what we did.
Yeah.
Canada wants to go back to Canadians and say, look, we've solved the problem. And of course, the US wants to say, we're not, going to take it anymore because that's
We're number
been
one.
the rhetoric. We're number one. Okay, we're going to move on in just a few moments. Welcome back to CounterPoint. We're wrapping up our topics today, and we're going to finish on a very fun one, I think. The World Cup. Okay, we are days away from the World Cup starting, or probably by this airs, it's already started. Mike, this has been a very interesting lead up to the World Cup. It's been frenzied. Things are hitting fever pitch. People are excited, but then there's also some woes. So why don't you start us off? What is the sentiment amongst Vancouverites, Torontoites about how World Cup is happening?
Well, I think people are pretty excited because the World Cup is the largest, most viewed sporting event on the planet. And it's an incredible opportunity for Vancouver and Toronto to shine. This is being shared between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So we only have a small portion of it. The downside here is that it's expected to cost Canadian taxpayers about $1 billion to host this event.
Wow, $1 billion. Is it going to be worth it, Michelle? Yeah. Tell me about the revenues that is expected. No?
No, I don't think it's going to be worth it. Because as we've seen through many Olympics, which is also, one of the largest sporting, events in the world, at the end of the day, everyone always loses. The only difference this time might be the slight differences. Is depending on how it proceeds, because we're splitting it up between the three countries, right? So, but I look at it, it's the same amount of hoopla, it's the same amount of advertising, the same amount of everything, but with less revenue because it's being split three ways. So I'm sitting there going like, whether we hosted it all our own or hosted in three different countries, we're still doing the same amount of advertising and the same amount of stuff. So how do we recoup our costs? I don't think there's going to be a win there, despite, having $6,000 tickets,
Well, yeah, we'll get into ticketing in a moment because that seems to be the big drama du jour. But the local economies, like a lot of these struggling restaurants are hoping for a real big boost for the next several weeks because, people will flood into their bars to watch, even if they're not able to pay the exorbitant fees to get in to watch at the Toronto or the Vancouver venues. People are traveling to the United States. I mean, there's a lot of tourism surrounded, a lot of negative tourism too, because there's a lot of human trafficking, unfortunately, during these large events. But there could be a pretty good uptick between the hotels and the restaurants and the bars. But she brings up a good point, Mike. What the heck happened to the ticketing? And is it like dynamic pricing? Like, what's the drama around the tickets? Why are these so much?
Well, they did make a really strong effort to get tickets directly to individuals who wanted to attend the sporting events, but there's a huge problem around scalping and everything else. There are so many people who want to attend these games that the ticket prices have gone through the roof. And as far as, local bars and restaurants doing really well, I don't think it matters. If Canada is playing Bolivia in
Yeah,
Minneapolis, I think
exactly.
people will still be going to the bars and restaurants to watch the games all excited. If you're a fan of the French national team, you'll still be going out to watch those games, regardless of whether they're in your town or not. And it just seems like an awful lot of money. And what is the net benefit? Because let me tell you, Canadian athletes in other sports are chronically underfunded. And to blow $1 billion on this when
Yeah.
average amateur athletes receive no funding, I think is pretty hard to take.
Michelle, is Canada a soccer country? This was kind of like a little bit of my concern on the uptake. I mean, obviously Mexico, it's very popular. In the U.S. and Canada, I don't think, like I've been to Europe to watch soccer games. I don't think it's as popular here in North America. So to Mike's point, like,
It
should we have
is.
invested money into like junior hockey programs instead?
It is popular. It's just not as popular as it is in other countries like Brazil and like Italy and Portugal and many of the Western European countries. So realistically, I would believe viewership would be greater through the Olympics than it would be for the FIFA. Because the Olympics touches a whole broad base of age spectrums, doesn't matter what country you're from. Whereas FIFA, it feels very, very specific. Like for instance, my grandmother will watch the Olympics, but she won't watch FIFA. I can assure
No,
you
but
that.
globally, the statistics show, or not even the ratings show, like the final World Cup match is known as the most watched, viewed sport in the world globally. I think because anybody, you know what, one thing I
Yes,
love about soccer, it's a low equipment sport. It doesn't matter if you're in the third world or the developed
agreed.
nation, you just pick up a ball and play. And there are kids who come from impoverished
Democratic.
situations who rise to international stardom because they handle a ball well. It's actually quite beautiful. It's a unifying sport. I really, really, truly believe that. Okay, we're gonna have to see what happens with the World Cup. Thank you both for being here. I appreciate your time, and we'll catch you next time. And that's all the time we have for today. We'll catch you next time on Counterpoint.